I'm Jennifer East. I'm the Director of Business Development with the Keystone Center and the Keystone Center Extended Care Unit for Sexual Compulsivity and Trauma. And I'm accompanied today by Dr. David Pellack, the Director of our Sex Addiction Unit.
Hello.
Hello. So, David, we're talking a little bit today about sex addiction as an intimacy disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me, what is an intimacy disorder?
An intimacy disorder, it has nothing to do with sex, or in a sense it does. I can be sexual, but I can't be intimate, meaning emotional. I tend to isolate. I don't share feelings. I don't want to know about your feelings. And sadly, sex, especially when there's been trauma, sex, the people are having sex with are just kind of objects. So there's no intimacy. I'm not necessarily worried about your feelings, how you're enjoying it. It's just about my pleasure. I could have sex with 8 people a day, probably not the same person, even, twice. I don't want to know their name. I don't want to do anything intimate like, hug them, cuddle afterwards, kiss them, know their favorite color, maybe not even know how it was unless you're going to tell me I was fantastic. A lot of people, their sexual skills become their identity. So this is who I am, and I don't necessarily care about you. I am just, this wonderful stud. This is how I've gotten affirmation in the past because of my trauma, or this is, only thing I feel as though I'm good at, good for. And I'm not good at the intimacy. So I'm not good at hugging you. I'm not good at saying, how was that? If you say, I'm really not open to that tonight, or how about another time? I'm going to push you. So the intimacy, meaning the emotional intimacy, is lacking. I can't remember the name of the book, but I remember in the introduction, they talked about how it was a book on sex addiction. And this author spoke in the introduction how individuals with sex addiction, we're taught as children, don't let anyone touch you, or don't let or show anyone parts of your body that are typically covered with a bathing suit or with underwear. And they said that, people with a sex addiction, I can show you everything, but I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to basically show you my heart, what's inside of me. My body parts, you could see it. I'm not going to let you know the real me. And when I read that, I just thought that was fascinating. And I thought I learned so much just from the introduction of that book. But that's often what happens. It's an intimacy disorder. I cannot allow myself to be vulnerable. I cannot allow myself to be, forthright, transparent with anyone. And part of it might have been, I've just gotten so used to having to lie about my behavior because no one would accept it. And it's gotten to the point where I even believe that you believe me when I, tell you, yes, I had to, work extra hours, even though the place I work at closed 3 hours ago or whatever. So it is about, being able to be yourself, be open, be present. And oftentimes there's identity issues. It's not uncommon for people with addictions, especially sex addiction, to not really know who they are. And often this stems from, a childhood where you weren't encouraged to do, to play an instrument, play a sport, socialize, or you were told exactly what you will be doing. You will go to church. You will do well in school. You will stay with family. They are your friends. So there's a lot of mixed messages. Either you're told exactly how you're going to behave, or sometimes you're just not, provided that nurturing. And then when you grow up, you're kind of, what do I do? Who am I? And sometimes, the sexual behavior starts in childhood. I'm not nurtured. In fact, I hear mom and dad screaming and yelling in the next room. And, I'm comforted when I touch my penis. And, holding it, becomes comforting. And then when I find out that I could masturbate, that becomes even more comforting. And then masturbation leads to this and to that. And nowadays, wow, the internet. I don't need anyone. Maybe I have my friends, so I could compartmentalize. I have my friends and they're great. And I have, sex either with myself or with people that I just don't care about. I really just don't have that intimacy. Even with my friends, I might not be that close. And as the compulsivity increases, oftentimes it's not uncommon for someone to give up time with family, with friends, in order to engage in their acting out behavior.
David, how does someone develop an intimacy disorder?
Well, again, it could, occur from childhood. I, wasn't nurtured. I was parentified.
What is parentified?
Parentified is when I'm either forced to become a parent to siblings, or I take on that role myself, partially because I see the need and I want to, be considered mommy's little helper, daddy's, big man, but it becomes awkward and it messes up boundaries. Dr. Kenneth Adams has, several books on mother enmeshment when he's married to mom, a number of good books that talk about enmeshment, and that's often, sometimes where the disorder begins. You can't have this close relationship with mom and then expect to be able to end it and start a healthy relationship with someone else. I found at, Keystone, through my work at Keystone, that a lot of people aren't nurtured as a child. In fact, they're often neglected, abused, told things like, I'll give you something to cry about if they, go to their parent crying. They see their parents arguing. They don't want to add to the frustration, so they stay away. They have an alcoholic parent, and a parent with an addiction, a parent with a mental illness where they're just not available, and they're not able to develop those tight bonds. They're not able to feel accepted when they make a mistake. It could be a parent that, well, you got, all A's and a B. Why didn't you get straight A's? So what I learned is, I'm just somebody to get straight A's. I have to focus on that. And they're not able to, develop, they don't feel comfortable developing a relationship with other people. Their self-worth might be such that, well, why would anyone want to be friends with me? It might also be just, one or two single experiences, intimate experiences where you ask someone, to date, and maybe you were socially awkward, you were rejected, you had a bad sexual experience, and the person made fun of you, or you were afraid it was going to happen again. And that just kind of, there's only so far I'm willing to go. Nothing ventured, nothing lost. If I don't put myself out there, I don't have to worry about getting hurt. So I'm just not going to get close to people. And sometimes people, they're not as social. Some people are more social than others. Sometimes you might find someone who draws that out of you. And sometimes you just, this is who I am. I've gotten so into my addiction that I don't socialize and I forget what it's like. I do without.
How do we treat intimacy disorders at the ECU?
Well, I'd say, one of the biggest things is, the person comes for treatment at a facility where they're going to be around other people 24/7. And I'd say that one of the biggest ways is not only being with other people that are in the same boat as you. They feel shame. They've done things that they're not proud of. They have an addiction that they want to get rid of. They've hurt others. And we help them reduce shame. Dr. Patrick Carnes talks about the significance of shame, that, the way that I know to relieve myself of bad feelings, or I'm being triggered by seeing someone that I find attractive or sexual, I might act out sexually. And then maybe that relieves the tension, the depression, the anxiety. It gives me affirmation. So I feel better, maybe a day, a week, whatever. But then in the end, I wind up feeling shame. Why did I do that again? What are the costs going to be? Will my wife, spouse, partner find out? How much did I spend? Did I contract a STI? Did anyone see me? And then the shame kicks in. We encourage people to start getting rid of the shame by sharing their life history. And they'll write up their life history and they will share it in front of the whole group. It allows the group to get to know the person, and it allows them to start dealing with the shame that they might have felt as in childhood, but never really thought of it. They might have actually blamed themselves for it, or they never thought of it as shame. Again, my mother suffered from a mental illness, so, she wasn't nurturing. I didn't have, cookies and milk when I came home. My friends' parents had that for them. And as a result, either I wasn't allowed to bring friends home. Nobody wanted to come to my home. My father was a rageaholic. We never knew what type of mood he would be in. I was embarrassed to bring friends over. We didn't have a lot of money. As a result, I didn't have, the nicest clothes. I wore hand-me-downs. When I was younger, it was, I didn't have the latest pair of Nikes or whatever. And you're kind of picked on for that. And a lot of people feel shame about that. It wasn't their fault that the family didn't have money. It wasn't their fault that dad had an addiction, dad had a mental illness, mom had a mental illness, whatever. Dad wasn't able to hold a job, yet they held on to that shame. And as a result, they withdrew. They stayed to themselves. So when people come for treatment, we encourage them to be social. We encourage them not to work in their bedroom, to work in one of two areas in our building, the dining room / our therapy room, or in what we call the blue room, the group room, or outside on the porch. But they have to stay together, be with other people. And sometimes it's just being in the room. That's a big deal for them. Then they start to talk. When they share their life history in front of their peers, they'll get feedback. People will, and it's typically positive. People will share, wow, you did a great job, sharing some very personal information. I can relate to the fact that blah, 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 blah. So not only does it start to heal the shame, but you realize I'm not alone in this addiction, in my past, in my feelings about myself, my self-esteem. There are others struggling with this. They also do 3 other assignments. The next assignment, you look at your life history and you develop a inventory of offensive, compulsive, and deviant behavior. So what behavior did I engage in, and how were others affected by it? And it's difficult. No one, wants to, really hear how their behavior affected other people. But that's the beginning of processing it and accepting yourself. This is what I did in the past. I'm in treatment. I'm starting a new life. I'm going to take responsibility for this, and I'm going to move on. I've got tools that I'm developing, and I'm going to be okay. After they share their, what we call the OCD inventory, they next share a victims list, and victim is a very strong word. But again, they need to get out what they've done, who was and how were these people victimized. And then, they'll get feedback from peers and from the facilitator. And we always encourage them, get it all out. Don't try to downplay what you've done or minimize. I look at it as mold. If I have mold in my basement, I hire someone to come in and take care of it. And, he's tired. There was a lot of mold. So, yeah, maybe there's a spore or two left, but, he thinks it's going to be okay. Well, maybe the mold won't come back in next week, maybe not in a month, but eventually it will come back. So that's why we encourage people, get it all out. Just, open up, get it out. And then we put, they're not allowed to speak with their peers about what they shared. We help them to sit with their feelings. Oftentimes it's difficult to get feedback like that. We want them to, experience the shame a little bit, not keep the shame, but, experience it and understand that they've learned tools that they can use to help them through this, that they don't need to turn to their addiction when they have these yucky feelings, whether it be anxiety, anger, depression, self-loathing, whatever. And then, it's called the 8 o'clock or 5 o'clock or 8 o'clock rule. If you share in the morning, you can't talk to others until 5. Now, you could talk to them. You could go for a walk. You could talk about the weather, sports, whatever. You just can't talk about what you've presented. And in the end, guys love it. They said, wow, I got through that. That would have been really difficult. If I was home, I know I wouldn't have wanted to felt that way. I would have either had a drink, I would have done something sexual, I would have fantasized, I would have done something. I wouldn't want those horrible feelings. The goal, again, is get rid of the shame. And then finally, the fourth assignment is writing a statement of responsibility. I take responsibility for engaging in this behavior, and you write it to a specific person or a specific group. I take responsibility for the way that it affected you. You list that. And then I take responsibility for not engaging in this behavior in the future by doing X, Y, and Z, going to therapy, being honest, open, and willing. When I speak when I go to my meetings, my 12-step meetings, when I talk to my sponsor, when I talk to people in my group. So get rid of the shame. And often, typically 90% of the time, that's the biggest inhibitor in people being intimate with others. And that's a lot to share, especially for people that have held this in for 40 years, a number of years.
So, David, what is the difference between sex addiction and an intimacy disorder, or is it all the same?
A good question. Dr. Patrick Carnes talks a lot about sex addiction being an intimacy disorder. I certainly think there's a big part of sex addiction that involves having issues with intimacy. I would say the only real difference is what people believe they're getting out of the actual sexual act themselves. Typically, people with a sex addiction have difficulty with intimacy. They've come to be able to compartmentalize, well, these are my friendships, so yeah, I could have fun times, I could talk to them, and then I get my sexual needs met or addressed through pornography, through massage parlors, through prostitutes, and I keep them separate. And, together I get my needs met. It's difficult for them to have a partner, however, that they can talk to and be open and honest, oftentimes due to the shame they're feeling, and feel comfortable being sexually intimate with them. Sex can be a very, very intimate activity when the two people are really talking about, sharing what I like, what I don't like, being open and honest with each other, not feeling coerced. And sometimes people with a sex addiction, this is my need, this is my want, they might be a little bit more coercive and not take into account the other person's feelings. And, that's where intimacy kind of ends. Sometimes men will mistake sex for intimacy. Well, I'm having sex, therefore, she loves me, we're okay. That's all we need. I often ask our guys, what does your behavior give you? What does it take away? What does it give you in terms of, for a lot of our guys, going to a prostitute gives me affirmation. I am sexual. I'm not in a relationship. I'm too afraid to be sexual. I am too embarrassed of whatever, my social skills, my body, my sexual performance, that I'm not going to feel comfortable being in a relationship. Or I know that sex is very intimate and I just can't go there. But I can go to a prostitute or a massage parlor, and afterwards I feel like, yes, I've been sexual, so I'm okay. So it gives me affirmation. I'm okay. I like what they say to me. I'm paying someone to say that to me, but I still leave feeling better momentarily, for a day, for a week. Eventually that goes, the shame creeps in. What is it taking away? Well, I'm feeling very anxious. I'm feeling very depressed. And I know when I look at pornography, it takes the endorphins go up, the dopamine levels go up. I get that rush. I get that rush when I go online and somebody wants to chat with me sexually, send me a picture. I send them a picture. They give me positive feedback. So it takes away my depression. I'm fully engaged in this activity. So in terms of mindfulness, I'm thinking about it wholeheartedly. I'm feeling it. I'm thinking about it. I'm doing everything. I'm just imagining in every way, shape, and form, using all of my senses to, enjoy that experience. And as a result, I forget about my depression, my anxiety, maybe for the moment, because I haven't learned any skills to fully address the depression, to address the anxiety, to address my anger. And chances are, when I start my day again tomorrow, the same thing very well might happen. But maybe the fantasies of what I did will keep me going, keep me from being as depressed as I was, until I get to the point where, again, I need an outlet. I need to get rid of the depression, and I act out. So I think, with the sex addiction, yes, I might have good friends. I might not feel comfortable talking to them. And again, so where is the intimacy if I don't feel comfortable talking to them? But my sex addiction is really all about just my way of getting affirmation that I need, or taking away my depression or some other negative feelings. And again, is it because I just don't feel comfortable talking about being intimate with someone, my therapist, my wife, spouse, partner, whoever, close friends if I have them? I just can't talk to them about it. And, there again would be the intimacy. But, maybe I can put the two things, I can compartmentalize. I've got friends that know everything about me, or I have, many friends. This one knows, A, B, and C about me. This one knows D, E, and F. This one knows A, B, and D. But no one really fully knows all about me. This person I could kind of joke with about my, sexual activities. But I know that person wouldn't understand, and I have to be that chameleon to please everyone. Maybe I'm a people pleaser. And, by being a people pleaser, again, where's that intimacy if I can't be honest with them and I can't allow them to be fully honest with me? So the difference between sex addiction and an intimacy disorder can be somewhat clear-cut, but oftentimes it is very much enmeshed and difficult to intertwine. I would say typically, where there's a sexual addiction, compulsivity, there is some degree of an intimacy disorder or intimacy issues.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pellack. We appreciate your insight.
Quite welcome. My pleasure.